Today, we begin with an announcement that immigration attorneys had feared, advocacy groups had warned about, and family petitioners had desperately hoped would never come. A policy change that unfolded not over months of deliberation, but in a single day. A single day that left thousands of pending petitions in limbo. A single day that separated families who thought they were weeks away from reunification. A single day that rewrote the rules of sponsorship that had stood for over 2 decades. What USCIS did today crossed a line that immigration advocates had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the immigration community did not stay silent. They responded with outrage, disbelief, and immediate legal action. For several months now, there had been signals, not official press releases, not formal policy announcements, just signals, that the Department of Homeland Security was preparing something unprecedented. USCIS has been strict, yes, but they have been predictable in their strictness. Their policy changes have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a warning system that gave attorneys time to prepare their clients. But what set off alarm bells in immigration law offices across America this week was that the pattern went silent. Immigration attorneys who monitor USCIS policy updates know the indicators. The sudden increase in requests for evidence, the unexplained processing delays, the quiet reassignment of adjudication officers, the sudden removal of online resources, all of that went quiet. And whenever USCIS goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Family petitioners, those U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents who have been waiting years to bring their loved ones to America, have been watching nervously. They've submitted their I-130 petitions. They've gathered their financial documents. They've prepared their affidavits of support. And they've been waiting, some for 2 years, some for 5 years, some for over a decade. Today, many of them received news that changed everything. Early this morning, USCIS released what they described as updated guidance on financial sponsorship requirements, including income thresholds that had not been modified in over 25 years. These are the kinds of policy changes that USCIS only implements when they are signaling something very specific: a tightening of legal immigration, a reduction in family-based approvals, or a fundamental shift in who qualifies to sponsor relatives. Immigration attorneys didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that USCIS was changing its posture on family immigration. And when a federal agency shifts posture without adequate public comment, even by small measures, the entire immigration community pays attention. Here's what the new rules state. First, the income requirement for sponsors has increased by 40% above the federal poverty guidelines. Previously, a sponsor needed to demonstrate income at 125% of the poverty line. Now, sponsors must show income at 175%, a change that immediately disqualifies millions of working-class Americans from sponsoring their own family members. Second, the types of assets that can be used to supplement income have been dramatically restricted. Previously, sponsors could use home equity, retirement accounts, and other investments. Now, only liquid assets, cash, and immediately accessible funds will be considered. Third, and perhaps most shockingly, joint sponsors will now face the same heightened requirements, eliminating the safety net that many petitioners relied upon. The statement issued by the American Immigration Lawyers Association tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Attorney after attorney, in conference call after conference call, described USCIS's move as devastating, potentially unlawful, and perhaps most importantly, deliberately designed to reduce legal immigration without congressional approval. But policy changes only work if the affected community accepts them quietly. The immigration community did not. In fact, their response today was among the most coordinated we've seen in years. Here's what we know. Within hours of the announcement, 3 major immigration advocacy organizations filed emergency requests for injunctions. These weren't routine legal challenges. These were emergency constitutional challenges. the kind of legal tools that advocates only deploy when they believe fundamental rights are being violated. The National Immigration Law Center issued a statement calling the changes a backdoor Muslim ban on family immigration. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center began hosting emergency webinars for panicked petitioners, and immigration attorneys across the country started receiving hundreds of calls from sponsors who suddenly don't know if they still qualify. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that USCIS implemented these changes targeting pending petitions, including cases that had already received initial approval and were awaiting final visa processing. USCIS changed the rules before petitioners could complete their cases. They affected applicants who filed years ago under the old rules. They affected families who had already sold homes and quit jobs in preparation for reunification. They affected elderly parents who may not survive another multi-year wait. In other words, USCIS targeted the most vulnerable point in the immigration process, the moment when families had already committed everything. This is what made the immigration community's response so urgent. USCIS's policy change wasn't just administrative, it was retroactive. It represented the kind of move that could separate thousands of families indefinitely if left unchallenged, and advocates, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't file scattered individual complaints. They didn't wait for more guidance. They hit the policy at its constitutional foundation. They hit the implementation mechanism. They hit the retroactive application that violates basic due process. Let me break down exactly what changed and who is affected. For a family of 4, the previous income requirement was approximately $31,000 annually. Under the new rules, that same family must demonstrate income of nearly $44,000. That $13,000 difference eliminates millions of American sponsors, teachers in rural areas, social workers, military families, first-generation Americans working multiple jobs to build a better life. These are the people now being told they're not successful enough to be reunited with their own parents, siblings, and children. And here's where the story becomes even more troubling. Policy analysts now believe that USCIS's latest move was designed to test the resilience of legal immigration after years of court battles over more visible policies. The administration wanted to see whether the public would notice changes buried in technical guidance documents, but instead, the opposite happened. Immigration advocates didn't miss it. They mobilized a response that was so swift, so coordinated, that even USCIS noticed. You don't get federal agencies to issue clarifying statements within hours easily. But today, the immigration community did. Senior officials speaking with reporters under anonymity described USCIS's shift as administrative attrition, a way to reduce immigration without the political cost of legislation. But advocates proved today that they remain both vigilant and prepared. Their legal filings were not only comprehensive, they were timed so precisely the courts received them before USCIS could implement secondary guidance. That timing matters because it shows the immigration legal community learned from previous battles. It shows that advocates are not passive observers. They are active defenders of immigrant families. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of this policy's impact. AILA reported that approximately 2.3 million pending family-based petitions could be affected. The State Department confirmed that visa interviews scheduled for the coming months may be postponed pending new financial reviews. Immigration attorneys operating in every state reported receiving emergency calls from clients whose cases were already at the final stages. This wasn't just a policy adjustment. This wasn't just bureaucratic housekeeping. This was systematic restructuring. This was deliberate restriction. And deliberate restriction is the one thing immigration advocates have fought against since the first travel ban. For every enforcement measure the administration has implemented, advocates have countered with something that protects due process. Today was no different. Remember, this administration thought courts would defer to executive immigration authority. They thought the public wouldn't notice technical policy changes. They thought family-based petitioners lack the resources to fight back. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Courts are accepting emergency filings. The public is paying attention. And family petitioners, supported by a network of attorneys and advocates, are fighting back with everything they have. The Affidavit of Support, Form I-864, has been the backbone of family immigration since 1996. It was designed to ensure immigrants wouldn't become dependent on public benefits. But it was never designed to be a wealth test. It was never designed to exclude working families. It was never designed to keep American citizens from reuniting with their own parents. Until today. What makes this moment so critical and so revealing is that USCIS's latest move happened at a time when the administration is under enormous political pressure. Immigration hardliners want more restrictions. Business groups want more worker visas. Moderate voters want compassionate enforcement. And courts want constitutional compliance. The administration is balancing these demands while facing an election cycle. And when leaders in that position make sudden policy moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. They're testing what they can accomplish through administrative action because legislative action has failed. That's why today's announcement came through guidance documents rather than formal rulemaking. That's why there was no public comment period. That's why affected families weren't given time to prepare. USCIS's statement, now circulating across immigration forums and legal networks, was designed to signal that the agency is committed to ensuring sponsors can adequately support incoming immigrants. Officials said plainly that the previous income thresholds were inconsistent with modern economic realities. That is bureaucratic language for, we're making it harder and we're not apologizing. You don't usually hear that tone from USCIS unless the policy comes from the highest levels. And tonight, multiple sources confirmed that this policy originated directly from the White House. Meanwhile, the executive director of the American Immigration Lawyers Association addressed members in an urgent, direct message tonight. She said, "This is not a minor adjustment. This is a fundamental attack on family unity." She said, "We will challenge this in every court, in every jurisdiction, with every legal tool available." And she said, "American families deserve better than a government that separates them through bureaucratic manipulation." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from an organization that understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. USCIS's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the sponsor income changes, the Department of State also increased documentation requirements for visa interviews. USCIS extended processing times for I-130 petitions by an additional 6 to 8 months. The National Visa Center increased fees for Affidavit of Support processing. All of this happened within the same 30-day period. When an administration moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. This appears to be a coordinated effort to reduce family-based immigration through administrative burden. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that the administration is preparing to announce even stricter requirements in the coming months. Another is that the administration is attempting to create a backlog so severe that family immigration effectively stops. A third possibility, the one worrying advocates the most, is that the administration is attempting to establish precedents that would survive future court challenges. But today, immigration advocates took that card off the table. They didn't wait for full implementation. They didn't wait for individual case denials. They didn't wait for the damage to become irreversible. They filed immediately. They filed comprehensively. They filed strategically. What we're watching now is a test of constitutional limits. The administration wants to see how far executive power can reshape immigration. Advocates want to show that due process still matters. Courts want to prevent constitutional violations. And families want to prevent permanent separation. The outcome of this battle will determine not just these specific rules, but the future of administrative immigration policy for decades. Tonight, we've heard from attorneys who are now reviewing every pending case for potential challenges. They say the new income requirements will affect at least 40% of current sponsors. They say the asset restrictions will affect even more. And they say USCIS's decision to apply these rules retroactively is likely part of a broader strategy intended to maximize the number of cases affected before courts can intervene. But the immigration community is not accepting this quietly. In fact, advocates are organizing the largest coordinated legal response in years. Their response today, swift, unified, and legally sophisticated, sent a message to USCIS that families will fight back. And it sent a message to the courts that constitutional boundaries must be enforced. As the evening goes on, we expect more details to emerge about exactly what USCIS hope to achieve and how courts will respond. But what we do know is that the legal community's response was timely. It preserved options for pending petitioners, it established grounds for injunctive relief, and it put USCIS on notice that retroactive policy changes will not go unchallenged. What happens next will depend on what USCIS does in the coming weeks. If they pause implementation, this moment will be remembered as a successful defense of immigrant families. If they proceed despite legal challenges, advocates have already shown they are prepared for a prolonged battle. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, USCIS appears to be reconsidering. Washington is quiet, too quiet. And when federal agencies are quiet after major announcements, it means they are assessing the response. It means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, this administration learned something they should have known from the beginning. American families will not be separated quietly. Immigration advocates will not stand by silently, and the courts will not allow constitutional violations to proceed unchallenged. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. Families are fighting back, attorneys are mobilizing, and the rules that were supposed to shock the immigration community may have instead awakened it. And we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.